Hello. Welcome to the Community Homeworks Workshop this evening. We're so glad you're joining us tonight. My name is Tiana Harrison and I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator. If you're watching this live, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you would like to join in on the discussion or ask questions, please put it in the comment section as well. If you're watching this after the live broadcast, we're still happy to answer your questions. It just may take us a little longer to respond. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with a mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our fundings from grants, gifts, and donations. So if you find value in this workshop tonight, we encourage you to donate on our website, communityhomeworks.org. Tonight's workshop is Power Tools 2, Power Tool Use, and Mr. Lee Taylor is our instructor. We are looking forward to learning so much this evening, and thank you, Mr. Taylor.
All right. So we actually have participants this time. It's nice after the long hiatus of going. Did you guys want to actually come up and try some of these while we were talking about them? All right, come on up. There's a pair of safety glasses there. Yep. So I'll let one of you come on up, and I'll talk about. We're going to talk about chop saw first. Scary looking thing, but it's not. So here's my first question. Did you watch the safety class? Just like everything, the more you try it, better you're going to be at it. So you want me to give you a mark and then have you do it, or just go ahead and give you a cut, or I'll give you a mark. So I'm going to make it small because we're going to use this. So I'll say that's what we want right there. If you want to do that, you can. Rotate it. Pull this back. Pull this all the way down to make sure you're square. And there's your pencil to give that mark. All right. I'm going to ask you to do one thing. When I take this, I'm going to ask you to pull up your sleeves real quick. Right. You don't want anything, right? You don't want anything loose to get caught in there. All right. Yep. And you want to square it up, so you want to push it. There you go. Yep. Yep. Open hand. Open hand. Usually you can use your palm. Yeah. And that's usually a good way to do it because, like I said, the safeties are all over the place, and some of them don't even have safeties on them. So it's just a good habit to get into. Yep. Sometimes it's just a little bit. Okay, now bring it up. You never want to start it when it's touching, so you're going to squeeze this, squeeze the trigger. It's going to kick a little bit. Let it get up to speed, then bring it down. Feel good. There you go. A little more. There you go. All the way through. Good. All the way up. Take your hand off the trigger. Push it all the way up. Just like that. And then that cut goes just like that. It is. So that's just a straight, simple cross cut. If you were doing something like trim or something like that, you want to try this? You're like, I don't know. Let's say you're doing trim. So like trim around a door. And you were talking like a window frame or something like that. Would you see that piece of wood? Yeah, let's grab that. Yep, that'll work. We'll use this as trim. And I talk about that in other classes too, as far as it's important. With rough work, it's not that big a deal. But you start getting into trim work, and all of a sudden that kerf, which is how thick of how much material that is taking out, all of a sudden can become a big deal. So this is where whoever's measuring, whoever's cutting, they communicate that. Like I said, right, because you can make. You're going to be quite a bit difference as far as being able to make the correct cut. So anytime you're using, let's say you're cutting trim, usually trim will have a wider side and a narrow side like that. Wide side is going to go up against the fence, so it doesn't rock. It gives you more body to be able to hold it in place, right? It's not going to sit there and do this sort of thing. So let's say we're going to make a standard 45, right? So I'm going to say that's our mark right there. So what you want to do when you're looking at this, you want to think how you're going to be moving this. You'd squeeze this down and move it to whatever direction you think it's going to go. All right, go ahead and do that. Squeeze that. Yep. And you'll feel it click. Just push it all the way over. You'll feel it click. Yeah, sometimes it moves. There it is. All right.
So then if I put this, I do the same thing.
Correct. Right. Yeah. So the blade is getting a little closer, but how you're holding it out here, trick you can do is hold it out here. Then you're out of the way. Now, I do want to say this. When you're doing this, still do your open hand, right? And you're looking at right where that blade touches that. And that mark may be a little hard to see. So I'll show you real quick what you can do. Sometimes it's hard to see that angle cut. Right. So what you can do is you can work into that cut. So if you're not sure, so if you come on this side, if you're not sure, I can always back it off a little bit. And I'll do it like that, but I won't do the whole cut. I can always go like this. Nope, I got to go more. Nope, I got to go more, right? And you can do those little fine movements as long as your blade is up all the way and you're not fighting it. So I'm going to let you go ahead and finish that one off. Oh, you'll be fine. Yep, you can just, yeah, you can use your palm or whatever. Each one is a little bit different. Yeah, all right. Bring it all the way up. Then you squeeze your, yep, like I said, all the safeties are a little bit different too. Yep, yep. It makes it so technically you can't squeeze that trigger without squeezing that safety first. Yeah, so do that. There it is. There you go. Yep, and that was the importance of when I talked about doing a full cut through, right, is that sometimes, especially with something like this, right, yep. So, I mean, and like I said, that's her most common, it's a 45-degree angle. It's the most common you're going to find, but they have other angles in here also that you can use. So, I mean, if you're reading something that says, cut it at a 15-degree angle, well, there's your 15 or 22 and a half or 31, and it just depends. And then if they're odd angles, I'm going to say this. So if it's not, let's say it's a 10-degree angle. All right, you want to come up here and so you can see this a little closer? So let's say it's a 10-degree angle. Let's put it at a 10-degree angle. And tell me where that is. Go ahead and put it right to it. 10-degree. I don't care which way. Doesn't matter. Yeah, sometimes they're a little grouchy. There you go. Yep. Yep. Now, remember how this one had that little notch to keep this from moving? Yeah. This one does not. So these odd angles, what you want to do is tighten this up. Yep. That'll lock it in. It's just enough where it's not going to shift on you. Now that you're 10-degree this way and then 10-degree this way. So, I mean, it just depends on which way you're going. So, yep. Yep. Right. Correct. Yep. You just flip it back and forth. Did you want to give it a try or no? Yeah, they say they're loud and all that sort of stuff. So,
hey, Lee.
Yeah.
When they ask a question, can you repeat it so that we can hear it online?
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. She asked if she was doing a 45 in a sense this way like this, and she would have to move it to this side for the corresponding piece, right? So that's that. As far as other little details with this kind of a saw, and like I said, this is a 10-inch. They come in bigger ones that are 12-inch. I think they have 10-inch. I think is about the smallest. Sometimes you are cutting large items, all right? And it depends. You're limited by how much height you have from your guard to your base, right? That's one thing to think about. A 4x4 is a real common thing a lot of people cut. What I've run into before, and this is one of those things that if you're buying one, you want to think about. Sometimes that motor is going to hit and bottom out before it hits whatever it is you're cutting. So, in this sense, what I did is I kind of I held this up like this. And what I did is I just did that to make sure I can do a full cut through. And this is something that could be done like in a store or something like that. And most of the time, if you're buying one new, it'll say what it can cut up to. Right. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing to keep in mind is how wide of a piece you can do. All right. So this is a 1x6, 5.5 inches. And when you go to cut that, it will cut through that, but just barely. And sometimes I can even try it real quick. Sometimes it doesn't. So I'm going to try this. Right? And, is that a big deal? Not really. Can it be a big deal sometimes? But, this is one of these things, like I said, the little larger blade is sometimes going to be able to let you be able to do different things. Another option, I guess, with this is what's called a compound slide, and it basically has bars. Right, so you can pull it down and push, and I can cut something that wide if I want to. Right. You can, right, and that's what you would end up doing, right? So if you're in a pinch and you're having to do something like this, it's tricky. You have to cut, and then what you have to do is flip it over, and you have to line it up perfectly so you don't have a cut that's offset like that. Right, because again, if you're right-handed, I always try to say to keep your waist to the right. That way it just you don't end up doing something like this. Because like I said, I don't know how many people I've caught out in the field doing something like this, and it's just like, stop, don't do that. So here's the other thing that you can do that makes life interesting. So like I said, there's the miter option on this. I'm sorry, the compound option. And what that does is it makes it so I can make a bevel cut. All right. Very rarely do you actually use this. A lot of times they come with it, but this all of a sudden opens up other dangerous, possibilities. There's a lot more that goes on when you're doing a cut like this. So sometimes, let's say I want to do a cut that was a 45-degree cut, right? And I want to cut it that way. All right. I could lay it down and do this, or I could stand it up, tighten this back up, back to 0, get it to where I want it, rotate that to my 45. I still got it. Right. So this is one of those things. If you find that you're doing a lot of those kind of cuts, sometimes you want to think about what it is you're cutting. If I were to try to do this with 2x6, wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fine. You can, a lot of times you have little scrap pieces. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm not good at that. As far as having somebody supported on either side, yes, you would want something supporting it. Generally, I don't like people supporting it, and the only reason is they have a tendency to lift, and it will bind the blade, and you get into some other issues. So, yeah, but if you're cutting it, you may have to set it up to where you have something on each end just to support it. So in this case, I can go ahead and make that hear that tool winding down like that. See, that's the thing is when you start getting into that, you can get it to where you get a little nip on there, but half time you can pick that off, and it's not that big a deal. So yeah, you can make all sorts of things with this. The thing also, when I talked about this in the safety class, sometimes you have something small. Don't try to cut something like this. Generally, I'll say if it's smaller than this area to wherever the blade is, don't try to cut it. Because what will happen is that blade will grab and it'll kick back like this and it'll come flying back at you. Right, and it hurts your fingers and all sorts of things. So it's just like, don't do that. So like I said, this compound miter saw is one of those. I'm keeping track of my time where the more you use it, the easier it becomes, the more you can find out you can actually do with it. So I could keep going on it. We've got other ones to get to. You guys good on this so far?
Lee, we have a question online.
All right.
What other materials can you cut with this saw?
Oh man, you can cut all sorts of things. Depends on the blade you put in it. You can cut metal. You can cut PVC. You can cut, engineered lumber. You can cut just about anything. It just depends on the blade that you put on. And then with the style also, you can even cut things like siding or something along that line. If you're using kind of like that compound slide, technically you can cut vinyl with it also, but you just have to be, you have to be thinking about what it is that you're cutting. So they said it's useful. You can definitely get into a whole bunch of different things. So go ahead. No. It does this cut tile? I have never seen someone cutting tile with it because you would need what's called a diamond blade on it. That's a good question. I've never seen anybody doing it, but in the same sense, I don't know. I could Google search that. I mean, I've never had somebody ask that, so I'm kind of like, well, could you? I guess you could. Yeah. So maybe.
What saw would you use instead of this to cut tile?
I would use a circular saw. So. Oh, diamond or yeah. You can use one of those diamond blades with a water bath type thing. Yeah, that's a special cutting for tile specifically. Right. Yeah, you wouldn't want. I mean, the amount of dust and stuff it would kick up is not good. So generally, yeah, you want something that's going to be using water if you're making a lot of those cuts. So, all right. So if you guys want to sit there, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to talk about these drill drivers and all this. I'm going to turn around. I'm going to make life easy. You want to scoot your chair over and let's do it right here. So this, all right, probably would help if I had batteries. Yeah. So you have drill drivers. A lot of this is very similar to a corded drill, but like I said, so you have two different styles here. You have one, this is a drill driver. And what I mean by that is you can drill holes in wood, all that sort of stuff. And you can drive, you can also drive screws, nuts, that sort of stuff, or bolts and stuff. So not nuts. So you got a drill driver here. You got an impact driver. And what this does, it is pretty much strictly for driving the long screws or something along that line. So they are two different types, but I'm going to talk about this guy first. So with the drill driver, yeah, I have the clutch set too. There it goes. So you have what's called a magnetic. This is a magnetic bit holder, and you can get a bit set like this where it will hold all different types of bits, and they just slip in. You can just trade them out for whatever it is that you're using. All right. To understand what type you're going to need boils down to the screw. And I want to talk about this real quick. I'm going to talk about Phillips screws first. So Phillips screws, I want you to look at these, three of these. Yep. So you have these X, right? So you have number one, which is relatively small, versus a number two, a little bit bigger. This is most common. And then you have a number three. And you can see that. Right. So the reason you do that is you want to make sure that you're getting the correct bit. So if you look at these bits, you're going to notice that this bit here is a number one. See how tiny that is, how pointed it is? That's a number two. And that's your number three bit. The thing is also is that you're never really going to use a too large of a bit. That's not the issue. The issue is that like a number one will fit in a number two, but you don't want to use it because they'll strip it out. So it's one of those things. Number two is the most common. It's usually when you get a bit set like this, you're going to have mostly number twos in it. Number one fits right in there. And it said it should fit in there and have no slack or no play, right? So those are the Phillips styles. And they also come in these where if you don't have one of these magnetic holders, you can have one of these that'll sit right in that chuck. And we'll get into those in a minute. It's the same thing, right? You have number 1, number 2, number 3. So you also have what are called torques. So, and a lot of times they're denoted by a T. It might be a T15 or T20 or T30. See this one here fits right in there. Doesn't have any real wiggle in it whatsoever. Versus, and I lost it because I'm a twit. There it goes. Versus this guy. And they are stamped on the side of this, but you have to have an eagle eyes to see it. And half the time you get used to it, you can just kind of go, oh, yeah, that's the right one. And again, you don't want to have any slop in it. So if it says T, it stands for torques, and that's what they're saying with this. The higher the number, the bigger the area to be able to receive it. There are some around that get up to like T30s, T40s that are big. It just depends. It's that no, not necessarily. Nope. This is just a different type of screw. It's just one that represents that different size that I was talking about. You're right. The body of the screw has nothing to do with necessarily the size of the bit driver, if that makes sense. Generally, yes. Yeah, you're right in that sense. Yep. Usually. So, yeah, like I said, it's never really. Then you get into the driver part of it. So this is, if you have something like this that has, this is like a 1/4 inch nut driver, and you can install something like that, and it will drive that, and it's stamped right on there. So, and that's where, like I said, this tool, I would say, as far as homeowner use, is probably the most handy to have. And the reason for that is, like, again, I can, no matter what I'm doing, I can flip and use whatever bit I need. Even with something like this, technically, I can put it in there and use it, switch it over to a nut driver. So when you're doing this, you have your forward and reverse. So that's what this button is here. So when it's running counterclockwise, when you're looking at it this way, running counterclockwise, that's reverse. It's going to back those screws out. You're going to press that button right there, and you're going to run it. Then it's running clockwise. That's what drives them. The other is what's called a variable speed trigger. So what that means is I can barely squeeze it, running at a slow speed, and the faster, the more I pull it, the faster it's going to go, right? You have a speed control up here. So max speed on this one is about like this. That's a slower speed. That's what you use for driving. If you're drilling a hole or something like that, you want a faster speed, and that's what that is. So it switches back and forth from your low to your high. And you can still even control it as far as that variable speed trigger. So that makes life a lot easier. The weight of it, I'm going to let you go ahead and pick that up. That's a pretty good weight. So it's not horrible. Generally what I'll tell people is, if you're buying something like this, pick it up. I'll give you an old version of one to give you a feel for what they evolved to. Pick that guy up. Right? Right, it is. And I mean, over time they've gotten smaller and they've gotten better. These have a lot of the same features, but like I said, that one, I said is a lot lighter. That's a lithium battery versus a NiCad battery. So, having something like that is always nice. The light on it is extremely nice because, again, you're going to be getting in those tight spaces and having to get around and do all sorts of things. So what I want to do, okay. Yep, you can do that's called a pilot hole. So, oh yeah, so you were saying I'm not good at repeating the question. So as far as pre-drilling a hole, so you want to put something in, so you'd want to pre-drill that hole. So what you want to do is go ahead and get a drill bit, and let's say you're doing what's called a clearance hole. You would get a bit. You see how I hold it up like this? And that's just about the same size body of that screw. I don't like that one. The reason is that screw's not going to bite anymore. So if you're going into something like hardwood or something like that, you may want to drop down to a smaller one. And you can see how that one is a little bit smaller, but still, big enough to where it's going to create a pile of hole for it to run into, but not so big to where that screw's not going to hold. Right. So there's that type of pre-drilling, and then there's also clearance. So sometimes you want to drill a hole where it's not going to grab into this first board, but it's going to grab in that second one. And what you'd want to do then is pick a size where, again, I can hold it up to it. I don't want it so big that the head's going to fall through. But I want it big enough to where it's going to clear the screws or the threads of the screws. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, right. Well, here, I can show you real quick. This one looks like it's going to do it. I'm going to not do that. So what I mean by a clearance hole, so what screws are I using? So you can see how that drops right through, and then it would grab in this. And sometimes you have to do that. If you're drilling into like hardwood or something like that, that little pilot hole where it's just enough where it can guide it, you're not going to break that screw in half. So like I said, if they say pilot hole is one thing, clearance hole, that's what they're talking about, if that makes sense, as far as those threads not catching. It depends on what you're doing, right? So, and that's what I'm getting at. You said you can get into a lot of little different details with this, but anytime you're running screws, as I said, most of the time that's what people will do with these. Is they're going to be running screws and connecting things and all this sort of stuff. Put this back in. What you want to do, and I'll let one of you guys go ahead and give this a try if you want. I have a number 3 bit in there. One of you guys want to come up and give it a try? No? No, you're going to run this screw in. Yeah, you want to do it? Come on up. It's a short screw. It's not going to go all the way in, but this is the only number 3 I could find. That's a tap gun.
What I'm doing with this,
Mm-hmm.
what I want to do with this is drill it in.
Correct.
Do I need to make a little
Nope, you don't.
pilot so I've got something? I don't want to stand there and hold this.
Well, good question. So, what you can do is you can get something that most people have. Well, yeah, and this is one of these things where there's so many little details, You can always get a hammer and just tap it in enough to hold.
Okay, and then just screw it down.
Yep, and when you're running your screw, what you want to do, you want it to be in line, not necessarily off like this or off like this. You want it right in line. Squeeze that trigger lightly. Make sure you're actually running in forward. And go ahead and run that screw all the way in. And I'll hold the board for you. Oh, yeah, you can do it. Yep, go ahead. Yep, right just like that. Put a little pressure on it back here. There you go. Feel that thing grab? Just like that.
I don't have a future in construction.
Oh, and again, this is one of these things that the more you use it, the more, the easier it becomes. So, I mean, this is, like I said, this is just demonstrating the different sizes. So if you want to do, say, like run a screw like this in, you would have to switch over to a bit size that would work for that. Right. So it just depends. You can. Okay, if that's the case, sometimes you can go ahead and reap that in. Let me back this thing out real quick, or I'll let you back it out. Go ahead and change the button. Other side. Okay. Go ahead and back that whole thing right out.
Now I have to be straight to back it out.
You want to, yep. You want to be as straight as you can. And make sure you're in. Always put pressure. There you go. Might be hot.
A little bit.
Yep. So you bring me to the next thing. See this little, see how this is real smooth? Go ahead and feel that. Yep. Right, there's no burrs on that versus something like this. Feel this one. There's little burrs on there, little lines. You can barely see them. I don't know if the camera's necessarily going to catch them. Right. What those do is they countersink. They will bore themselves in and dig into the wood and flush it out. So we're running out of time quickly. Okay. So you want to try this one?
Nope.
No? You want to try it? You want to give this one a try? All right.
With this thing, it's a collar, right?
Yep. It's just some people call it a washer head screw or a fender screw. I mean, there's a lot of different names for it. It's just a different style of screw. And that's almost a whole other class. Okay. Well, so again, right, you'll feel it. You'll feel it. You'll be able to see it. We're not setting the clutch. I haven't gotten into that one yet. So I'm gonna let you go ahead and just use your hammer just to go ahead and give it a little tap where you want it. You're not driving that all the way in, just enough to hold it. There you go. You'll be right in line. Okay. Other hand up here. You need to tap it hard enough so don't do that. There you go. Give it a whack. It's not going to hurt it. There you go. So you want to be in line with that screw. Good.
Hand up.
Like this. Put your hand up here to give it a little bit of pressure. There you go. Yep. Now, are you running in forward or reverse? So change your button. Hit down the other side. Other side. There you go. Now try it.
Now that looks like when you use yours in mine. Is that because it's smaller?
It is a little, because it's a little bit smaller. Yes, you were using a quite large screw. This is actually called a Tapcon. Right, and that's what those little burrs dug that in. It countersunk that screw in. This is technically going to concrete. But, so, like I said, with this, a lot of times when you're using this, the more you use it, the easier it's going to be. You have that variable speed trigger. The tool will talk to you. Hear that noise? It's not happy. It's not engaged in there at all. It's going to sit there and strip the screw out or strip this out. One of the two. Right? You can, let's say you're, I'm going to go ahead and back this guy out. Let's say you're running run out of time. Let's say you're doing something to where you want the screw to not necessarily dig in too far. You can do what's called the clutch. So I can set this clutch setting, it has numbers on it. And I can set it down to whatever. And it depends on how hard the wood is that you're going into. It depends on a lot of different things. So usually what I'll do is I'll set it at something light first. Put it in forward. And run that down. See. Nope. See, I'm just driving it all the way through. So that clutch didn't engage. So I'm going to back that clutch off more. You can hear that clutch engage there. There it is. But the idea is that I'm going to take this way down. Right? So you heard that clutch engage and it's stopping that from going. Right. So then you can go ahead and bring it a little bit more. Or you can just run it. So this is one of those things where, like I said, when you're using this, if you're having to do multiple, you're like drywall or door hinges or something along that line, where you don't want to overdrive them. That's where that clutch comes in, and it's really nice. So this is the drill driver, and again, that's a real quick. But like I said, as far as the tool that is usually the most handy for most homeowners is this. As I said, you can do a lot of things. The impact driver is strictly for driving, but I can take this, I can get a screw that's this long and just go and just drive that thing in. Yeah, I mean, if you're having to do really big, long screws or something, no. So that's a good question. So just because it's impact, this is not necessarily meant for cement. All right. So to go into cement is what's called a hammer drill. And that's where a lot of times on this clutch setting, it depends on the drill itself. You may have a hammer setting on there. It looks like a hammerhead. And what that does is it sits there and pounds the back of that drill bit, which is a special drill bit, and makes it so you can drill through concrete. It also ups the cost of this. So it's one of those things you want to look at, like you're looking at the set. And a lot of times, this is a porta cable, and these are designed to be used and abused every single day. But if you're looking at, different brands and stuff, sometimes that's where one can look so much more expensive than the other because it may have that feature to be able to drill into concrete. Now, sometimes you need that. Yeah, right. I mean, I've seen people do it, but it's just going to tear the tool up. So yeah, impact drivers, drill drivers. As far as even like with the corded drill, most of that still falls into that same, the same stuff. So the other thing I want to point out is what's called your chuck size. This is a 1/2 inch. And then you have all the way down to like a 3/8, which is much smaller. And that's a 1/2 inch there too. The reason I say get a 1/2 inch is because sometimes you may need a drill bit, something like this, right? And this drill will deal with that, but you want it to be able to actually engage in there. So getting that 1/2 inch chuck is going to make it so that I can use some of the larger bits. It's called a nail eater bit. You would drill, this is like to drill holes. Sometimes you just need to drill a large hole. Let's say to pull a wire through. I've seen people use old ones like this where you have a tree stump in your yard and you want to kill it. You have it cut down and they drill holes with something like this, then fill it with whatever and then let it rot away. So like I said, it just opens up a lot more use to be able to have that 1/2 inch chuck versus that 3/8. So, and then, too, you get into this too. So sometimes these larger drill bits, this one's reduced down, but sometimes they're all the way, So it's just little things like that just makes life a lot easier. So like I said, those drill drivers are really nice. And like I said, the more you use it, the more you realize what you can actually use it for. So put this guy back. Maybe not. There he goes. All right. So does that make sense as far as the bits and everything else? Like I said, I could spend more time on this, but I don't have time. Right. So all those bits and everything else make a big of a difference with that. All right. I'm going to pick on this guy now. So we have a circular saw. We did one. This is back to the cordless set. That's really nice because I can switch over to whatever it is. That's not the right one. I grabbed the dull one. Whatever one we're wanting to do. So like I said, that's a nice. Yeah, I threw that one in there earlier. So a circular saw like this, like I said, most of the corded ones are the blade is a 7 1/4 inch blade. This is a little 5 1/2, 5 1/4, something like that. 5 1/2, I'm pretty sure. Blade. The only real difference with that is, go ahead and do this while I'm doing all this, is how much it'll cut. this distance right here. So it's only, you know, with a smaller blade like this, you're only going to be able to cut. That's like 2.5 inches, right? Something that's like a 1x. You'd probably be able to cut a 1.5 inch, 2x4 with this also. But that is one of the limitations if you go with a smaller blade like this. The larger the blade, the thicker something that you can cut is probably the easiest way to look at all that. All right. Right. But the other thing about all that is, like I said, if you're using a corded one or something like that, is the weight. Sometimes pushing that saw through all the time can make life kind of miserable. And a lot of times, if you're doing a lot of cross cuts, that's where that comes in, and that's where using that, it saves your arms and everything else. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to use this as our guide, right? So when you're using this, I'm going to walk over here. I'm going to do this. So if you want to come on over, we'll talk about this. So what you want to do when you're cutting something like this, you want to make sure that you're actually going to be able to cut all the way through. And my back is to the clock, so it's not doing me any favors. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that it's deep enough to be able to cut through whatever material I'm going through. Sometimes you don't necessarily need all that, and you want to shrink it down a little bit. So in this case here, I'm going to unscrew this. What this does is it limits how much of that blade is actually going to be running through. The reason I do that sometimes is it just a little saves the blade a little bit. You don't have as much of it running through. It's not, you know, going all the way through and heating that blade up. So I can adjust that to whatever I need. Tighten it back up. I'm going to make a mark on this. So I'm going to say, that's my mark. And again, back to that, how you do it, you know, as far as how you have that mark. You know, you cut to the right, you cut to the left. It's one of those things you just have to kind of figure that out. A lot of times, and again, I'm right-handed, so I like to be able to look straight down. If you come on this side, you can probably see this a little bit easier. I can go in here and I can look right at that blade and see exactly where it's cutting. You can also see that there's this little notch up here where that line is lined right up. This varies greatly with the different types of power tools out there, circular saws and stuff. Oh no, some do, yep, some do. But the issue is this: is you know, that if she asked if there's a ones that have a laser guide on them, and there is. And the issue is that laser guide may be sitting here or sitting up here, and yes, you can get it to where it's going to go. But once you get past a certain point, that laser is not going to be touching your wood anyways. So we're still where you want to keep an eye on that side of it. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, you know, and this is a good sharp blade. We'll get into that in a minute. And you can still see my fingers sitting up here. I'm going to get it to where I want it. I'm going to back it off a little bit because you never want to start it with the wood touching. And that's a general rule for just about any tool. This one has a safety, so I'm going to squeeze that. I'm going to touch it. There we go. I'm keeping this flat. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. Right? And when I cut, I'm going to push and cut all the way through. And again, you know, if you feel the weight of this, let me pick that guy up. Not that bad compared to a corded one that can get really heavy after a while. So, you know, you can make it where, you know, you can make cuts pretty simply with that. Another nice little trick you can do is you can use one of these speed squares. And let's say I don't necessarily trust my guidance. What I'm going to do, I'd clamp that side, is I'm going to use this and just let that guide follow it right along. and that's going to give me a nice square cut. You can do the same thing on that. But so this is where those come into play, those circular saws. Circular saws, a lot of times people use them just for cross cuts, meaning against the grain. There's no grain in this, but against the grain. You can also technically do a rip cut with that. Rip cut would be, so let's say this is a standard piece of wood and your grain's running this way along with the grain. That's a little more specialized. So you have to kind of get into details as far as holding it and all that sort of stuff, but it can do it. You can also do what's called a plunge cut. And what that means is I'm going to set my depth, and let's say I want to get through this piece of wood, and I don't want to get anything underneath it. So I'm cutting out, let's say, a floor, a damaged section of a floor, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to loosen this up. I'm going to move this up and get it to where I can grab a scrap piece. Oh, I shouldn't be doing that. I can do that, and I can say, I just want it to just get through, right? So it's just enough where it's just getting through. Right. But what I'm going to do is, this is called a plunge cut. I am going to have you hold it on this side now. All right. So what I'm going to do is I pull that guard up like this. I'm going to hold it like this. Start it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and drop plunge cut into it. Get it all the way down, and then bring it to wherever it is I want to and stop. And then I can go ahead and go. I'm not going to get you. I can go along like this, and I could drop that in and move it up. The issue is you can't get all the way up. That blade is going to do this. So this is where you need a handsaw or something like that to get in there to be able to cut that out, or you overcut it a little bit. But that's how you would get in to be able to, right, yeah, if you're having to cut a bad section of a floor out or something along that line. So the other thing is that 5 minutes left. I always run out of time. Tools, tools will talk to you. They will tell you when they are not happy. So this, I talk about this as far as kicking back. What I mean by that, hear that noise? Relatively right. I bind it with a corded circular saw. It's not going to stop like that. What it's going to do is it's going to want to come back at you. So this is where you're listening to it. As soon as you hear that, you feel it pushing back a little bit. Sometimes you have to back it up and straighten yourself out again. And you can also see how I'm standing. I'm standing off to the side this way. Right. So if it kicks, it's not coming back at me this way. And I've seen people do it where this way, and they come right back, and they have that guard stuck open for some reason, piece of wood stuck in there, and it goes. I'm not going there. So, right. Yep. Where it's binding and it burning that wood. Yeah, it'll show that occasionally. So like I said, and with a dull blade, you kind of heard how that was sounding as I was cutting through it. This is back to the good old thing of tools will talk to you. They will tell you if they're not happy. So I'm going to let you to listen to this one as I'm cutting through. This is a dull blade. You hear that change in that, and I'm having to push on that quite a bit to push that through. But that's a duller blade. This is back to the thing of nice sharp blade. Going to make it so that tool is actually going to be able to do what it wants to do. So, no. You just get a new one. A lot of times with these style blades, show you. She asked if you can sharpen these style blades. Thank you. She keeps me in line. So you see these little tips right here? These are carbide tips. And what will happen is that these will dull, but they'll also break off. If you hit, if you hit a nail or a screw or something, whatever. Can they be sharpened? I imagine they could, but you're gonna spend so much on it. So it just depends, right? You know, a lot of the older styles before they went to these carbide tips, yes, you would take them in to get them sharpened and stuff. You know, a lot of it too boils down to how you treat that blade. And if you don't force it, you don't, you know, run through things like nails or screws or whatever, that blade's going to last you quite a while. And I was back to when I was talking about making it so it wasn't necessarily cutting through unnecessarily deep, if that makes sense. So we are at 6 o'clock already. Holy crud. Are we done? I can keep going. It don't bother me.
And I am so grateful when people come in class and join us because it allows us the opportunity to really, really get the magnificent that is Mr. Taylor. I want to thank you guys for tuning in with us tonight. Next Tuesday, we're going to have an Ask the Expert roundtable discussion where if you are looking to sell your home, we're going to show you exactly some things that might make that process easier. So I hope that if you have any other questions, you feel free to put them in the chat. And I want to thank our participants for coming and joining us in person. And I'll see you guys next week.